Ozzy's career was over. It was finished. And then fate intervened, and Ozzy launched one of the most improbable comebacks in the history of heavy metal. Put on your jackets, people. There's a blizzard in the forecast. Next. Welcome, metal enthusiasts, to another episode of The Metal Dude Abides. Tonight we continue celebrating the year 1980 by talking about the absolute best musicians of the year. We're going to talk about guitarists, we're going to talk about drummers, and we're going to talk about bass players because 1980 may also be the absolute best year ever for bass players. You're going to love some of these selections. But first, we're going to go to our artist spotlight because a great story in 1980 is emerging. Ozzy Osbourne is about to rise up like the phoenix coming out of the ashes and make one of the most improbable comebacks of all time. For those of you who may or may not know the story, Ozzy had been recently fired by his band Black Sabbath, a band that he and Geezer and Tony Iommi had basically formed heavy metal. And he was out. His marriage wasn't going much better, as that was also coming to an end. And a record executive had given Ozzy an advance with the hope of Ozzy doing a new solo album. But Ozzy blew all the money on booze and cocaine. No band, no family, penniless, and in a very high addiction. It didn't look good for Ozzy. These are usually stories that, let's be honest, end in tragedy. Well, that record executive was none too happy with the fact that he had given Ozzy all this money and still didn't have an album. That man's name was Don Arden, and he sent his daughter Sharon Arden to see if she could get something out of Ozzy, to see if she could help get this album off or recover some of his money, something. But Sharon had her hands full because Ozzy had fallen into quite the addicted state. At one point, if you want to know how messed up Ozzy was, here's a story that's not for the faint of heart. As they were trying to get this new solo album back up and running, they went and met with some record executives to kind of, promote the fact that Ozzy was feeling better, doing better, ready to do his thing. And they thought, fresh start. So Sharon had this great idea that he would release these doves into the air in celebration. But Ozzy was off his bean and picked up one of the birds who had fluttered down under the table and bit off its head. Can you imagine how those suit and tie executives were feeling when Ozzy did this heinous act right there in the boardroom? Like I said, Sharon had her hands full. But they needed a guitarist. And this is where the story starts to turn. A local kid who was playing for a band called Quiet Riot. You probably heard of them. They went on to fame and fortune a few years later. Randy Rhoads was their selection. And what a brilliant selection it was. Randy Rhoads was exactly what Ozzy needed to invigorate his sound and give him kind of a new feel. They also brought in Bob Daisley on bass. Ironic, because Bob Daisley had been in Rainbow with Ronnie James Dio. Dio, of course, goes over to Sabbath to replace Ozzy. Ozzy brings in Daisley. And for that matter, Don Airey, the keyboardist, who had both been part of Rainbow. Kind of switching and swapping here. And finally, they complete the band by bringing in drummer Lee Kerslake. The Blizzard of Oz has been formed. They're ready to make an album. Not only that, the woman that helped get this thing off the ground, Sharon Arden, falls in love, becomes the woman you know today as Sharon Osbourne, because she marries Ozzy, and Sharon and Ozzy become the first power couple in heavy metal history. It's quite a story, quite a comeback, and quite an album. Let's go through this album track by track. Let me give you a guided tour through one of the greatest albums in heavy metal history. If you're going to make a huge comeback, you better have a good opener on your album. And in this case, Ozzy and the Crew nail it. Don't Ask Me is a scorcher of an opener. And I don't know, I was thinking about this the other day. It has kind of an effect where if you listen to it, it sounds like it's far away and then it comes rushing past you. It's a very cool effect, and it actually makes the song even seem faster than it really is. Also, very good lyrics, good heavy start to the album, great start to a great comeback. Now, the second track on this album, unless you've been under a rock for the last 50 years, you will know this one. Crazy Train, one of the biggest hits in the Ozzy catalog. Now, some people might say, I've heard Crazy Train 6 million times. I'm kind of tired of it by now. And I understand that. It's played at every sporting event. It's everywhere. It's probably being played in a mall somewhere. Elevator music. I mean, this song is really hit mainstream. But I have to say, I never get tired of this song. And I'll tell you why I never get tired of this song, and it's kind of the point of this whole thing. Randy Rhoads' guitar playing, especially the solo on this album, just phenomenal. We were talking a couple of episodes about how maybe Eddie Van Halen is absolutely the best guitarist of that generation. But Randy Rhoads is my favorite. I don't know. Maybe it's because he left us so early. Maybe it's a psychological thing where we only get 2 albums from him before he tragically passes. I can own that. But like I said, 45 years later, I still enjoy. I still get goosebumps up and down my arm listening to this man play guitar. I just think he's brilliant. I just love listening to that guitar. It's one of those things. I don't want to be over dramatic, but there's a lot of people a little bit older than me who always used to say, I remember where I was when I heard about Kennedy being shot. I still remember exactly where I was when I heard Randy Rhoads had passed. One of the greatest tragedies in the history of heavy metal music. Like I said, it's been over 40 years. I'm still not over it. You left us too soon, Randy, but once again, the music you left is so beautiful. And speaking of beautiful music, let's keep going on this album. The third track on this album, Goodbye to Romance, is one of the most underrated songs in the entire Ozzy catalog. You know why people love Ozzy? It's not necessarily because he's a great singer. When you look at all the great heavy metal singers, Ozzy's kind of towards the bottom of the pack, if we're being honest. Is it because he's a great frontman? Sure. Ozzy puts on a pretty good show. But I don't think either one of those things is the reason people love Ozzy. They love Ozzy because he's real. He's the working class hero singer. And so one of the things that I love about him is in this song, he just tells you there's some emotion to this song. Again, back to the story. He just got dumped by Black Sabbath. They've moved on. They've got Ryan James Dio. They're putting out their music. Marriage not going well. And this song has a very melancholy feel to it. Like he's kind of sad that all the goodbye to friends, goodbye to romance, all the people that in his life had kind of gone away. But the beautiful thing about the song is, even though it's kind of in a melancholy pace, there's this little spark of, but I think tomorrow's going to be better. And maybe it's because he had found Sharon, he had found Randy, and all of a sudden you could see there was a little bit of optimism, a light coming out of that darkness that he had latched onto. This is such a cool song because it really tells a story about not just a musical, story, but it's almost like an autobiographical song of where Ozzy was at that time. I love this song. If you haven't heard this song, because it wasn't a big hit, go listen to this song and keep the story that I said in mind about how this man, who had been on top of the world, one of the biggest singers and one of the biggest bands in the history of the planet Earth, found himself in quite a pickle. This song talks about his feelings in those moments, and I love this song to death. Third track, Goodbye to Romance. In 1979, Eddie Van Halen had a really cool acoustic guitar intro to a song on Van Halen 2, Spanish Fly and DOA. Really good stuff. Check out the show from last year. Randy Rhoads says, Hold My Beer, and does a similar thing with the song D, like this beautiful acoustical number that he puts together, breaking into then Suicide Solution. Very heavy number. It's funny, it's D is so beautiful, and then Suicide Solution just comes in and he slides down the neck of that guitar, and we're off to the races. Also, contrary to a lot of belief and a lot of controversy at the time, Suicide Solution is not, I repeat, is not about suicide. It's about drug addiction. It's about alcohol addiction. Wine is fine, but whiskey's quicker. This is about a man who had serious demons and serious addictions that he's confronting in this song. Not about suicide. If you were following the career of Ozzy, there was a lot of, in the mid-'80s, heavy metal guys were in court every other day. Ozzy was in court over this one because people were saying he's promoting suicide. Nonsense. Nothing could be farther from the truth. What Ozzy is saying in this song is stay away from drugs, stay away from alcohol, because they will kill you. Don't do it. Which is a very wholesome message if you think about it. Whenever you get an old timer like me talking about music, we always listen to all of this on albums, sometimes cassettes. Don't even get me started about 8 tracks, but particularly for me was albums. So now we're going to flip over to side B, because as you know, back in the day, albums, you played one side, you had to flip them over. This is the start of the second side. A lot of times, we don't judge an album necessarily by the full album, but by an album side, because that was the way you listen to it. Well, Ozzy starts off side B with the best song on the entire album. Listen, I don't want to dog on Black Sabbath too much, but let's be honest here. Sabbath had grown stale. The last few albums, Black Sabbath didn't even really seem to have the same identity. They were lost in a drug-induced phase. But if you go back to the very first of Black Sabbath, they were spooky. You go back to that first album with Black Sabbath and The Wizard and NIB, they were a little bit on the creepy side. This song, Mr. Crowley, is kind of a throwback. This could fit in on the early Sabbath, the good Sabbath, before they got progressive, before they were trying to be something that they weren't. That original vision, Mr. Crowley, excellent. And I do want to point out, I mentioned him earlier, Don Airey on keyboards, absolutely. Randy Rhoads, we're going to talk about his solo in a minute, but I also want to talk about Don Airey because I'm not a big keyboard guy. Like, sometimes you can use keyboards in a song and it's just really beautiful, really brings it home. But most of the time, people don't know what they're doing with keyboards. They put them in there and it just takes things out of place. And a lot of times it kind of takes off the heaviness of a song. Not in this case. Don Airey, congratulations. That is beautiful, haunting, really brings the atmosphere together. So that then Randy Rhoads can bring it over the top. Because the famous story is, Ozzy writes a song, Mr. Crowley, very kind of dirgy, like I said, spooky, and he says, hey, Randy, good luck writing a solo on this one. Well, challenge accepted. Randy Rhoads not only puts together a solo for this, he may put out his best solo of his entire career right here. Kind of odd that you could take a slow, dirgy song like that and put together that impressive of a guitar solo. If you've never listened to Mr. Crowley, go back and listen to it and pay special attention to the keyboards of Don Airey and the guitar work of Randy Rhoads, because they are special. If you've watched this channel in the past, you know my highest accolades for an album is to say it's a perfect album. Every song on it is good. Every song on it, no filler, just really good from start to finish. Unfortunately, Blizzard of Oz is not a perfect album, because here, track number 7, No Bone Movies, is a real lemon. It doesn't even seem to fit with the vibe of the album. I mean, it's not a good song, and it's not, you have the haunting Mr. Crowley, and we'll talk about Mother Earth here, another really cool, moody song. And then you have this thing just kind of stuck in there, just wedged in there. Not good. There's a rumor out there that the reason that they picked this song was so that Don Airey would have at least one song where he had writing credentials on it. If that's the reason why, not a good reason. There's a couple of songs that have kind of floated out. If you go out on the internet, you can find. And this is a tricky one to say. So, me looking at you, looking at me, and You Said It All are two songs that were in strong consideration for being on that album. I think both are better than the stinker, No Bone Movies, which unfortunately disqualifies Blizzard of Oz from being a perfect album. Just an excellent one. Song number 8 is Revelation, Mother Earth. And I, for the life of me, cannot imagine why this song isn't a bigger hit. We talked about Goodbye to Romance. This is another of those underrated gems in the Ozzy catalog. Much like Mr. Crowley, this is a song that you could really see going all the way back into the early stages of Black Sabbath. It's creepy, it's moody, it's got crescendos. I really like the way they put this song together. And the passion that Ozzy sings this. Mother, please forgive them, for they know not what they do. Oh, let my mother live. I talked about this. Ozzy's not the greatest singer, but again, he can sometimes, especially when he's emitting sadness and just angst about something, he can really deliver. He delivers here, one of his best vocal performances. Revelation, Mother Earth. And finally, the album ends with Steal Away the Night. Nothing great about this song, to tell you the truth, but it's a nice way to close out the album. Nice, fast pace. You had kind of, like I said, you had Mr. Crowley and Revelation, Mother Earth being a little bit slower song, so you want to end on a high note, kind of bring it full circle. They do the trick here. Great way to close the album. Great album. When you start talking about, I don't know, top 10 albums of all time, top 10 heavy metal albums of all time, it's hard to say these are the 10, right? There's always going to be a little bit of varied opinion. There's always going to be those, well, it's close, it's not close. So let me put it to you this way. This album would be in the running for one of the top 10 albums of all time. That's how good this album is. I've been loving this album for, like I said, over 40 years. It's amazing how time flies. And this is still an album that I get out every once in a while and just listen to. And it's just, again, maybe Crazy Train's been a little bit overplayed over the years, but the rest of it just sounds fresh. The production of this is fantastic. Randy Rhoads guitar playing, beautiful. If you came into Ozzy late and you haven't gone all the way back to the beginning, please do yourself a favor. Go check out this album. Now, speaking of Randy Rhoads, I wonder if he's going to get a nomination for Best Guitarist of the Year? Let's go find out. Our nominees for Best Musical Performance of 1980. Our first nominee, Black Sabbath, with the song Lonely is the Word. Now, it's been a couple of years since Tony Iommi got a nomination in this category, all the way back in 1975 for Symptom of the Universe. But boy, does Tony Iommi come back with a vengeance. Listen, we're talking this week's episode about Ozzy and rising up and what a comeback. Next week, we're going to take a look at this bad boy, Black Sabbath's Heaven and Hell. It's going to be on the Artist Spotlight because this is another great album. It's kind of funny. We'll talk about it next week. But when you have a band like Black Sabbath break up and both parts become better than what was the original, very rare that happens. So tune in next week. We'll talk a lot more about this album. Our first nominee, Lonely is the Word by Black Sabbath. Our second nominee is Def Leppard with the song Rocks Off. If you go back to the first 2 years of Def Leppard, the first 2 albums, I'm just blown away by the tone of the guitar on those 2 albums. Sensational, heavy playing. When you get to Pyromania and on, they kind of smooth out all the edges and you don't really get that really cool, deep guitar tone. Now, also after the first 2 albums, Pete Willis, one of the guitarists on the band, is fired. So I'm assuming this is Pete Willis playing here, although I'm not sure because they also have the late Steve Clark in the band at this time, and he's a hell of a guitarist in his own right. Maybe they just changed their sound. Maybe they just decided that they were, the riffs were too heavy. I don't know. I'm going to give it credit to Pete Willis, but if it was Steve Clark, put something in the comments, let me know. But regardless, this is one of my all-time favorite riffs. It's a very simple riff, but it is so energetic. It just pops. I love this song to death. Our second nominee, Rocks Off by Def Leppard. Our third nominee, Into the Arena by MSG. That's right, Michael Schenker, one of my favorite guitarists of the 70s. Made such classic music with UFO, made such classic music with Scorpions. Well, he started out on his own now, and his first solo album is an absolute banger. So many good songs on this first album, especially. Kind of like, what we talked about with Tony Iommi. You could pick several different songs on here, and you would be talking about one of the great guitar songs of all time. I almost went with Cry for the Nations. Quick story about that. I saw Michael Schenker and Ted Nugent in concert way back in the day in Phoenix. It's a night I'll never forget. 2 of the greatest guitarists ever on stage, and that night, Michael Schenker played Cry for the Nations, and it just blew me away. Played it so beautiful that night. But on the album, I did choose a true instrumental, Into the Arena, one of the great works of Michael Schenker, our third nominee. Well, surprise, surprise, our fourth nominee, Mr. Crowley by Ozzy Osbourne, and of course, the legendary guitarist, Randy Rhoads. I said it when we were talking about the album. I'll say it again. This may be the best guitar solo in Randy Rhoads' catalog. And albeit a short catalog, that is saying a lot. Our fourth nominee, Mr. Crowley. And finally, you can't talk about great guitarists in this era and not mention Eddie Van Halen. And he's got a song on the album Women and Children First called Fools. And I don't understand how this isn't a bigger hit as well. Eddie does some cool guitar stuff in here. He kind of starts off fingering around, strumming around, and then he breaks into, in my humble opinion, the heaviest riff in the history of Van Halen. Check out this song, Fools. And the winner is... no surprises. Mr. Crowley, Ozzy Osbourne, and the late, great Randy Rhoads. I will never get tired of listening to this man play the guitar. One of the all-time greats. He had to be the winner this year. I love this song. Now we're also going to award a winner for drummer and bass player. Let's start with drummer. The defending champions in this category, Motorhead, who won in 1979 for the song Overkill. But they've got some competition this year, namely in the form of Bill Ward. We talked about Tony Iommi a little bit later. Same thing with Bill Ward. Haven't seen Bill Ward in this category for a while. But wow, what a great metal drummer he is. And in the entirety of the album Heaven and Hell, he is killing it. Now the song I picked out for him is Die Young. It's a real banger. And a lot of it is because of the driving beat of Bill Ward. Check it out. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the debut of one of my favorite drummers of all time. He has arrived, Clive Burr, Iron Maiden. And again, you can pick any song off this album. It is a tour de force of drumming. But I'm going to pick Prowler. Just the flurries that Clive does so effortlessly. He is that epitome of speed and power that I love in drums. But the defending champions are too strong. The winner, Motorhead, with a song called The Hammer. There's a lot of great songs on Ace of Spades, but I always look at this song, and maybe it's because Lemmy makes a big deal about tying Phil with this song on the live album, but this song just screams Filthy Phil Taylor, and it is not only a great song, but the drumming on it, outstanding. So, for the second year in a row, Best Musical Performance by a Drummer goes to Phil Taylor. Congratulations. And finally, we haven't done a lot of this, but I wanted to make a special call out to the bass players out there, because 1980, oh my God, some of the best bass playing I've ever heard. Let's start with Strong Arm of the Law by Saxon. Let's go to Phantom of the Opera, the great Steve Harris and Iron Maiden. Geezer Butler on Heaven and Hell. Ian Hill, Judas Priest, The Rage. And yet none of them can bring home the prize, because it's also going to Motorhead and Lemmy for the song Ace of Spades. Lemmy is Lemmy, right? We talk about what a great singer, songwriter, the leader, the charismatic front man of Motorhead. And I don't think sometimes we give him credit as being one of the best, absolute, kills it on the bass. Ace of Spades, go back and listen to the bass on this thing. The amazing thing about Motorhead is they have a wall of sound coming at you. And there's just the three of them. Phil, Fast Eddie, and Lemmy. So if you're going to make that much sound, you got to have a bass player that can go nuts. And Lemmy does just that on this album. So Lemmy has to bring it in with Ace of Spades. But like I say, Ian Hill has been a rock for Judas Priest. I don't know that he's ever had a cooler bass line than on The Rage. I think Heaven and Hell is Geezer Butler's finest moment. There's a few songs, we'll talk about that when we get to that album, but man, Geezer, I can't believe he got beat, because he plays the hell out of the bass on that album. And of course, like I said, we got Iron Maiden. Steve Harris is an all-timer. I do want to point out that Saxon, we have, really good stuff. I really like the bass line in Strong Arm of the Law, one of my favorite Saxon songs. So, all in all, congratulations to Lemmy. You're going to win Best Musical Performance from a bass player. But what a stacked field. That is an accomplishment, because I could have easily gone with some of the others, but at the end of the day, you can't erase the majesty, the excellence of Ace of Spades. And that's our show. We're going to keep going through the 1980s. We hit the newcomers last year. If you didn't see it, go back and check that out. This week we're doing Best Musical Performance. Next week, Best Vocalist. And I'm going to tell you something. 2 of my favorite vocalists are going to go head-to-head with 2 of my favorite songs head-to-head. Oh, it's going to be torture, but I got to pick one. Tune in next week to find out. And the best way to tune in and find out is subscribe to the channel, click the like button, get alerts so you don't miss a single episode. We do this every Tuesday, and you don't want to miss any of it. You don't want to miss all the great stuff we have in 1980, because after we do vocalists, we're going to do a special program on just the best hard rock song and album. And then the granddaddy of them all, we're going to do the best metal song and the best metal album of 1980. And let me tell you, the competition is stiff. Guaranteed, every nominee will be one of the best albums that's ever been made. That's how tough the competition is in 1980. So, looking forward to seeing you in future weeks. In the meantime, this is the Metal Dude signing off. Take care.